It's 6 o'clock, so let's start the Committee of the Whole meeting for 29th. Get the roll call, please.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Here.
Alderman Sheep.
Oh, here.
Alderman Myers. Alderman Hansher.
Here.
Alderman Garrow.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderwoman Schneider. Here. Turbid.
Here. We're all here. First up, we've got the overview of fiscal year 2023. I think Bill's going to take it away and lead us through a robust discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the committee, thank you for taking time out of your summer schedule to help staff with the budget development process here going into 2023. We have been working on the budget since early July, and the budget team that's here with me, including Finance Director Jen Angroff, Assistant City Administrator Justin Schuneman, and Assistant to the Finance Director Marie Kaiser, just concluded our meetings with all of the departments last week and early this morning to review their budgets going into 2023. And as we look out into the calendar, we've got about just inside of 4 weeks to get a budget put together and shipped out to you so that you'll have time to review it before our Appropriations Committee meeting, which is likely going to be during the first week of October. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the slides here tonight. But we very much appreciate you again being here tonight to get up to speed on some of the challenges that we've been facing, not only through the budget development process, but as we've gone through 2022. And, you know, the department heads, who I just mentioned a moment ago, have been doing yeoman's work in terms of dealing with some of the fiscal challenges that all businesses and organizations and institutions have been up against in a rather high inflation environment here in 2022. And I think collectively the organization has done a great job of mitigating some of those challenges and addressing some of those concerns so that when it's all said and done here at the end of 2022, we'll be able to look back and say we adhered to the budget plan approved by the council last fall and did our very best to be good stewards of the public's resources. So with that, we're going to get going through some slides. Director Engroff will be sharing some of the slides with me here tonight, and we'll proceed from there. In order to kind of kick things off going into 2023, I sort of look at this as being the next chapter. And a year ago, we were sitting here and we were just kind of coming out of COVID. We were still doing vaccine clinics here in this room. And while COVID has stayed with us here in 2022, we were turning the page and moving forward. And I think now we're entering a new chapter. We have a newly adopted strategic plan. The I-43 expansion is going to give us a new 6-lane interstate through the entirety of Mequon here within the next couple of years. Andy Nurbin was elected as our new mayor in the spring of this year. We have a combined fire and EMS department in the formative stages with the village of Thiensville, and we have a debt financing opportunity, or opportunities rather, in front of us that we'll be able to discuss as we move through the budget process here and into the latter part of this year and the early parts of 2023. So we'll get into that here momentarily. And as you can see up on the screen, this is a picture that was published in the news graphic last week concerning the I-43 expansion project. And what you see on the screen is the Highland Road interchange taking shape. You can see the on-ramps and the off-ramps being designed and earth being moved in connection with those efforts. But the spans for this bridge are open, or laid rather, and this interchange will be open late this fall. You'll recall in February, the city borrowed a portion of the proceeds for this improvement, the $1.75 million commitment, that was made back in 2013 or 2014 at an interest rate of 1.8%. So it's a reminder of how quickly things can change from a financial perspective. But all in all, this is a transformative change that is going to not only help forward the overall I-43 expansion project, but also have cascading effects on Port Washington Road, as well as motorists' and residents' ability to get around and through Mequon. So tonight's agenda, as laid out in the packet that was distributed to you last week, will include some general considerations that we're up against. We'll talk a little bit about capital financing, both on a pay-as-you-go basis as well as debt financing. We'll give the council a sneak preview of the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS budget that's been in development through the Southern Ozaki Fire Board since mid-July when they started meeting. We'll have an opportunity to present to you and hear your feedback regarding an allocation plan for the American Rescue Plan Act funds that have been received both this year and into last year. And then if the council or the committee is inclined, we have a short closed session to discuss a couple of items related to personnel that impact not only our unions, but may have an effect on our general employee populace going into 2023. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Engroff, who will give a quick overview of fiscal year 2022, where we are on revenues, expenditures. Jen, take it away, please.
Okay. So what you see on the screen here are general fund revenues and expenditures through July 31st. We have the budget, actual, and then year-to-date percentage of actuals to budget. So start with revenues. 8.9 million of the 18 million budgeted has been realized through the end of July, which is about 49% of the total revenues budgeted. While we are under that 58% or 7 of 12 months budget benchmark, much of it is due to timing. So the remaining 6 million of property tax revenue was settled earlier this month with Ozaki County. So that alone brings us from 49% to 82% of our budgeted revenues. Also, notably, state shared revenue, internal service revenue, special assessments, and other revenue are recognized unevenly throughout the year, many toward the back end of the year, if not a year-end process. Additionally, EMS fees or ambulance fees have a 2 to 3 month lag. So you'll see that it's a lot less revenue than that 58%, but we anticipate those fees to be at or above budget for the year. Inspection permits are lagging slightly, but they are largely offset by overperformance of other permits, general fees. And then lastly, on the revenue side, investments are showing an unrealized loss because accounting rules require us to record the investments at fair value. So the losses are not realized. The portfolio, it's important to remember, it's ultra conservative, and there is little to no downside within the portfolio outside of the fees to manage the portfolio. On average, we have about a 2% return. And then if we take a look at expenditures, 9.7 million of the 18 million of budgeted expenses has been realized through the end of July, which is about 53% of the expenditures budgeted. That's under the 58% or 7 of 12 months budget benchmark, which is good. However, inflation is real. The city is feeling the effects of rate increases, notably with staffing, also with motor fuel expenses, utilities, work supplies. So as a result, we anticipate that the fleet department will likely have a budget amendment toward the end of the year, which is only due to the motor fuel overage, which thankfully has stabilized more recently. And then, while some of the variance related to the swimming pool is also attributed to timing differences, being that the season is now wrapped up, there were also some, staffing rate increases, lifeguard rates in order to keep the pool open. Additionally, there were some utility costs that have been on the rise, So that will likely require a budget amendment toward the end of the year as well. We can move to fund balance unless there are some questions.
Any questions on the year-to-date financial update? Okay.
Okay. And now we're taking a look at fund balance update. This doesn't include all of the funds, but the more notable ones. So we're taking a look at the December 31st, 2021 actual balances, and then a projected or kind of a year-to-date look at 2022. So the general fund, or the main operating fund, is showing a slight reduction, bringing it from 13% of budget to 12% of budget. So it is a reduction, but it's still within our 10 to 12 month or 10 to 12% requirement. We're still at the high end of that range. We're projecting a deficit for 2022 due to the high inflationary environment we find ourselves in, as well as fund balance utilization for one-time expenditures. On to park impact fees. Due to continued residential development within the city, park impact fees were showing about a 20% increase in 2022. For the revolving loan fund, we're showing a reduction in fund balance, largely due to the Mind Plus neurology loan issuance that we had in 2022, which was approved by council earlier in the year. Moving on to general obligation debt. By the end of the year, that balance will probably be closer to about $120,000. It's increased due to the debt issuance that we had earlier in the year. It's the note premium that will be amortized over the life of the loan. And then we have the TID 2 debt service, which is remaining flat to last year, as the principal and interest payments largely are the same as the tax increment generated by the TID. And then lastly, TID 3. Year to date, we're showing a 75% increase, or $1.2 million, which is attributable just to the great success and value increase of the TID. And this is going to allow the TID to repay the capital projects funds, as well as put some additional improvements into the TID prior to its expenditure period closure next year. That wraps up the fund balance. Yes?
Hopefully Kim doesn't have to get up, but can you just explain why doesn't TID 4 and 5 get accounted for in fund balance? Program?
Well, I think those are pay as you go versus there's debt associated with these two TIDs.
So again, just echoing Director Engroff's comments, these are all projections for year-end 2022. We'll certainly endeavor to update the committee and the council on the status of these balances as we roll through the remainder of 2022.
Can you just highlight for the public, just, some people are going to be watching at home what TIP 2 and 3 are, so they know which ones are performing at which level?
Well, TID 3 is the town center, and then TID 2, I believe, is Port Washington Road. I'm not. It's the business park. Business park. Okay.
4 and 5 are Port Road. But there's no money borrowed, so we don't track them.
So TID 2 is the business park, and then TID 3 is the town center. Both scheduled to close within the next several years. I think 2025 for the business park and 2027 for the town center. But you can see the significant jump year over year in the TID 3 balance.
So just a question of process. I know years ago we gave ourselves a loan from the capital projects fund to the TID 3 before it was gaining momentum. Do we wait till the end to pay that back, or do we do it early? We haven't decided.
That's not a question that we've discussed at length internally amongst staff, but Mayor Durbin, my guess on behalf of the staff members that are present is we're probably going to roll through the projects that have been identified for the town center in which part of our bond issuance earlier this year was taken out for, and pay for those projects and use the balance along with the bond proceeds to ensure that we've got those projects paid in the time frame specified, because those all have to get done within the next year. Thereafter, as we did last year as a council, we would look to reconcile the capital account. As the council will recall, we had a bunch of different projects with negative account balances, and we were able to use some accrued interest to zero out those negative balances and bring all of the capital projects into the black. And we would look to do a similar exercise once we roll through the identified capital projects that the council has approved for the town center.
Perfect answer.
Good question. Okay, welcome Alderman Meyer.
Thank you.
We'll keep moving along. In terms of overall considerations relative to the establishment or the creation of the 2023 budget, the council will recall that we have a current tax rate of $3.08 per $1,000 of assessed value. We received figures earlier this year regarding the city's net new construction for 2022. Net new construction is up just over 2%, and roughly that's equivalent to about $360,000 worth of new tax levy that can be used without impacting the tax rate or increasing this number. Our excess levy above the allowable limit, which as the council will recall, there are levy limits in place here in Wisconsin, and you cannot go above those levy limits if you are a municipality. We still have $630,000 worth of excess room should the council decide to pursue additional spending in this year or in a future year. So that's a good number just to keep in mind in the back of your head as we roll through some of the requests and some of the budget requests rather that you may receive from groups both inside the organization as well as some of our boards and commissions. City fees were last reviewed and adjusted in 2021. We went through an exhaustive process during the height of COVID to review all of our fees on a departmental basis, and that resulted in a number of changes which took effect at the beginning of 2021. And as was mentioned in the memo in the packet, $200,000 of ARPA funding was used last year to restore a number of cuts that were realized during the height of the COVID pandemic, and those are in the 2022 budget for this year. On the expense side, we've mentioned high inflation a couple of times. The latest figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicate that the July 2022 CPI for all urban consumers was 8.5%. That's down slightly from the 9% that we were all experiencing earlier this year, and hopefully the downward trend in inflation continues. But right now, as we sit here in midsummer, that's the latest figure that we're up against. The budget, as I mentioned right out of the gate, has been absorbing increases across several areas. Director Engeroff mentioned fuel in particular. Postage rates have been raised twice here in 2022. Utility costs, both electricity and natural gas, are rising rapidly. I saw a newsletter yesterday indicating that natural gas prices are up 31% on a year-over-year basis from July of last year to July of this year. That affects us just as it affects homeowners and businesses and any operation that has facility or capital needs. Wages have also had to increase. Some of the new hires coming into the organization, we've had to go a little higher in order to get them in the door, and the lifeguards also needed a wage increase in order to staff appropriately the pool in a safe manner here in 2022. Looking ahead into 2023, we know our health insurance costs are going to be rising to the tune of approximately 5.5%. retirement contributions on the part of the organization for our employees in police and fire will be at 1.5% and 0.6% for all other employees. And then we've itemized compulsory adjustments that all of the departments have identified as they've gone through their budgeting process for next year. Those are included in your packet, and the budget team will be reviewing and considering those as we prepare the larger budget that'll be coming your way here later this month. So I'm going to pause right here, right now. Are there any questions about any of the compulsory increases that were included in the 4-page spreadsheet that was in the packet that was sent out? And as you can see, just kind of perusing the document, a lot of the increases relate to utilities, gas and electric, across all of our city facilities. Motor fuel is another increase, postage. We've got some one-time increases relative to the mayor's salary, which was adjusted by the council during former Mayor Worth's term. We've got some other expenses that we're anticipating relative to the legal side of the operation. Any questions on any of the increases identified by the departments? Not all of these will get into the budget, but we want you to be aware of some of the cost pressures that we're facing as we go through this year's exercise. More generally, we know that the fire and EMS budget are going to be coming out of the city's budget for 2023. And just as a reminder, any combined department of one or more entities or municipalities enjoys a levy exemption, which is equivalent to the CPI plus 2%. So that may be an option for the city, the village, the common council to consider as we look to fund the new Southern Ozaki Fire Department, both going into next year as well as in future years. As you'll recall, there's a 5-year plan to staff up the Emergency Medical Services Division so that we can provide full-time, around-the-clock response across both of the municipalities. That'll result in approximately 15 to 18 full-time firefighter paramedics when it's all said and done. We have a compensation review currently underway that's being headlined by Assistant City Administrator Shinneman. We should have results on that probably by mid-October to early November, and there will be a presentation to the council. We anticipate likely a 1 to 2 year implementation of those recommendations going into 2023 and beyond. So that's not something we're necessarily going to have to wrestle with all in one budget year. We at Trust, which is one of our 2 health insurance plans that city employees currently can select from, it's our more expensive plan, is being replaced by the Employee Trust Fund administered by the state of Wisconsin. Health Partners Southeast will now be serving employers in the Southeast Wisconsin region. We have not yet received premium rates from Health Partners Southeast, so we'll be looking at that as we build the budget over the next 4 weeks. There's also an appraisal of our risk insurance services that's being conducted by the finance department. We're not only looking at commercial insurance, we're also looking at risk pooling opportunities, of which there are 4 or 5 that exist within the state, whereby counties and municipalities and towns pool together to share their risk and lower their premiums. So Jen Engroff, our finance director, is hopefully going to have some information in the next couple of weeks. We hope to bring that to bear to our budget development process, and I don't know if we'll see any savings because insurance rates also tend to be going up. As the council will lastly note, our previous budgets have all toed the line, and we've endeavored to bring you a budget with no increase to the tax rate. We've been able to do that over the last number of years, but as you can imagine, we're holding many, if not most, lines across all budget areas flat in order to do that. And so there have been little or no increases for inflation across the various line items, aside from personnel and benefits, for commodities and purchase services and contractual services that often go to support a lot of the work that the departments do and that the city staff frankly cannot provide. Software services, cleaning services, specialized repairs to some of our vehicles. Those are just a couple of examples whereby those line items are mainly and have mainly been flat, and in some years they've been reduced. So we're letting you know that we may be at a point where it's no longer possible to bring a budget that has no increase to the tax rate. So we're up against a lot of inflationary pressures, just as businesses are, just as organizations are, just as institutions are. Any questions on the information presented so far?
Just a little side note. I know we're moving it from the budget. There still has to pay for this stuff, but when we send out the taxes, are we going to do that in a separate line item? So people see how that breaks out for the police and fire and the combined?
For the fire and EMS?
Yeah.
That's a very good question, and I don't have the answer as we're sitting here right now, Alderman Meyer.
I think it'd be a nice thing to see that for the residents, have a breakout that way. I don't know if that's a possibility, but.
Right now, what I compare the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department to is it's very much going to be like our library, Weinberg Library, where it's something that we're committed and responsible for funding, but it may not show up as a separate line item on the tax bill. So
I had the same question
You did?
a couple weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah.
How's that gonna look?
Sorry, I'm a little late for that question.
No, it's okay. I figured we'd just save it for the meeting.
but we'll work to get that answer and bring that information back as we roll forward. So, in terms of balancing options, as I mentioned, over the last 4, 5, 6 years, we've brought a budget to the council that has largely maintained a flat tax rate. And as the city administrator, I'm proud of the work that we've done as a staff to toe the line on spending and to be responsible and adherent to the previous direction of our mayor and council. But in this high inflation environment, if we're not able to meet that directive this year, is the council amenable to considering a tax rate adjustment in the budget that we send to you? Is the council amenable to potentially adjusting fees across of our fee schedule? Or is the council amenable to allowing the budget team to put together what we feel is a responsible budget plan for you to consider that may have a tax rate that's higher than what we have now, which is $3.08 per $1,000 of assessed value. We don't need to answer that question right here at this point in the meeting, but we'd like you to think about that and maybe get some sense of where the council is as we begin to tie up this budget over the next 3 to 3.5 weeks. Our goal would be to bring you a flat tax rate budget. As I'm sitting here almost 8 years into my job, I'm not sure we can do that this year.
Don't like that answer. Yeah.
So we'll keep moving on.
Shouldn't be too much of a surprise. It's been an extraordinary inflation year.
Yeah.
We do run a lean ship and have for quite a while, so it's.
Just to comment, I think if there are any increases, we have to really call out why we need them and really just vet those in discussion and or make sure they're spelled out in the packet. So as the public's reviewing it, they know that, we're really making sure that we're being fiscally responsible. We're going to have some increases with fire and police over the next several years. This inflationary time is hitting all of our residents, their pocketbooks, their gas bills, everything else. Whatever we can do to make it something consistent, at least for a year, would be great, you know, to perform. We've got an extra, what did you say, 360,000 of, you know, new development that can, you know, go to that to help offset some of our increases. But, you know, we've been doing this long enough as a council. We're not ignorant to the fact that, yeah, there may be something else that you may need to ask for. And I know a couple of us want to see a few things really kind of targeted on this upcoming couple budget cycles, you know, to really kind of figure out what we're going to address and clean up some of these things we've been talking about for a while.
Okay. So just as an example, a tax rate adjustment, a 1% adjustment on the tax rate of $3.08 would generate approximately 3 cents, 3 additional cents. So, you know, 308 goes to 311. That would be equivalent to about $150,000 of additional money. In an environment of 8.5% inflation, is there, and again, I won't ask you to answer the question, but I'm throwing it out there rhetorically, is the council willing to look at a nominal adjustment to the tax rate as part of the budget development process going into appropriations?
Are there any, like, if you were to do the fee analysis, and if any of them were just clearly not break even, you know, what we're charging versus what we're spending, I think that's an easily justifiable. Fees is a more interesting way to go than the levy for certain items, for sure. So I'm open to fees if it's a true, like the parks and our rentals. Pretty sure that that's not a break even. I'm sure it's a slight loss. So there's things like that where people would understand what the actual value of the service is versus just like a carte blanche increase for everyone. So I like the use space increase.
Okay.
We last did fees in
2021.
So it's, if we did them early on in 2023, it wouldn't be like it's not time to review it again.
Yeah.
We do it every couple of years naturally, so.
Yeah.
That's low hanging fruit, but it's
A little bit.
it'll be, you know, small berries when we're looking for apples or pieces of fruit.
And
It'll help.
it's a fairly labor intensive process too, because you're collecting a lot of information on all, and our fee schedule's 10, 12 pages. I mean, it's not, there are a lot of fees we have.
Unless you take the approach you did there and just did 3% or $1, whatever's more.
A broad brush.
Broad brushed it, yeah. And maybe we could dive into a few rabbit holes where we think we might be losing money and level set those and do that at the same time. Just to reduce it, because I know it
Sure.
is 12 pages. I've looked at the fee schedule recently. It's long.
Yeah. Alderman Meyer?
So what we've had in the past, and I know some people have asked for it, and I've asked for it myself, and it's been provided, is if we did go the route of no increase, what would that force us to give up, or what would that force us to cut? If that, so we'd have some kind of, instead of halfway through the budget talk and saying, hey, let's have this comparison, if that's done ahead of time, maybe we can save some time and take a look at that.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you correctly, show what a flat budget would be, and then anything that didn't get into the flat budget, sort of on the side. Or
That would,
listed
correct,
listed for the council to see.
correct. I mean, if we came in a flat budget, this is what it would mean to the city or to the residents. So,
Got it. Okay. All right. That's all for budget considerations. We're going to move on to capital financing. And we'll spend as much time here as the council desires. But our goal here is to just give you a quick update of where we are, a snapshot of how things are shaping up going into 2023. All of this information was included in your packet, so I won't spend too much time. Pay-as-you-go funding, which is included in the general fund operating budget, is up 53% since 2015. Pay-as-you-go capital was increased last year by approximately $130,000, so we're just at about the $1.3 million mark on a year-over-year basis for vehicles, for road maintenance, for emerald ash borer remediation, a number of different items, equipment replacement across public works, police, and fire, roadway lighting, etc. That's our pay-as-you-go capital. Our debt service will be remaining level for 2023. Even in the wake of a $9.6 million issue at 1.8% back in February, we're in a pretty good spot relative to debt service. We haven't seen an increase in that because we've structured our debt responsibly such that we're keeping debt service level and not putting upward pressure on the tax rate. So when you add 10 million in, and the fact that we're going to be able to pay off all of our debt across the city over the next 10 years if we don't take on any additional debt, that's a really strong position to be in looking forward. And that's retiring all of our debt across all of our funds. Tax Increment District 3, the sewer utility, you name it. Anywhere we've issued debt, it's all scheduled to retire within the next 10 years. So that gives us the opportunity to plan additional capital projects identified not only in the capital plan, but in our recently adopted strategic plan. Here's a quick snapshot of our pay-as-you-go funding. As I mentioned, it's up just over 50% since 2015. We have not yet put together an amount for 2023, but it will likely be close to the number in 2022, given some of our other budgetary challenges. The pay-as-you-go detail, I just mentioned some of the categories that were included for 2022. You can see road maintenance, vehicles, equipment, parks improvements, roadway lighting, emerald ash borer, and citywide building repairs. We've got a couple of projects cooking there with the City Hall door replacement, and I think you'll see another contract award coming at our meeting in September. So here's, this is a little hard to see, but this was in the packet. This is our current debt base profile. This was put together by Ehlers and Associates, our financial advisor, and as I was just mentioning, across all of the various areas where we've issued debt, Tax Increment District 2, Tax Increment District 3, the sewer utility, the sewer service area, we've got all of these scheduled to retire by 2031. And if you look at all of our general obligation debt, it totals to just under $6 million. But when you take out all of the areas that have dedicated revenue sources for this debt, our net tax levy is that 2.8 number I was just talking about. This is the number that goes in the general fund budget, and which is in the debt service fund that Director Engroff was talking about earlier. And as our equalized value continues to rise, and these are all conservative estimates, our tax rate is going to drop to the point where we could be down to zero within 10 years. But we know that's not where we're ultimately going to wind up, because going forward, we're going to probably have another road issue in 2025, maybe 2028. Every 3 years, we've been issuing about $4.5 to $5 million worth of debt to keep our roads in really good quality condition. So I think there's probably going to be a desire to continue to want to do that in the years ahead. That being said, we're going to be in a position where as this debt service or net tax levy number drops, we can work with Ehlers to structure debt on a bigger issue, a capital issue, such as a new public safety building, a new East Side fire station, a new community pool. I'm not going to tell you we're going to be able to do it all at once, but if we were to take a larger issue out over 20 or maybe even 25 years, the potential is there to issue one or more projects upwards of 10, 15, maybe even $20 million. So we've got a lot on our plate right now with the fire department merger, with all of the inflationary pressures that we've talked about here, and getting a budget to you in the next 3.5 weeks. But as we roll through budget development and developing an ARPA spending plan as well, as we roll through the budget process here over the next 60 to 75 days, staff is going to be coming forward with more information in advance of discussions either late this year or early next year, kind of like how we did strategic planning and getting the council to coalesce around what our next projects are going to be. And that may require some space needs analysis. That may require some civic campus master planning. We may need to do some actual planning work to understand the scope and the magnitude of these projects. But the good news is we're in a very prime position to think about where we want to put our next big debt issue and attack a lot of the needs that are identified in our facilities study, a lot of the needs that are potentially identified in our capital plans, and a lot of the needs that are called out in our newly adopted strategic plan. So just a kind of a warm-up to some additional important conversations that I think frankly are going to involve, in some respects, the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department as well, as we move forward there. Any questions? Any thoughts? Anything that you'd like to see in any of the projections, the debt projections that we'll be working on with Ellers over the next couple of months, to refine in such a way that we would be bringing them forward to the council in the near future? Yes, Alderman Garrell.
I just wanted to say that I wanted to thank my colleagues, and I think for their prudent use of borrowing. I mean, we borrowed when we had to. We borrowed at extremely great rates. Inflation at 8.5, and our borrowing at 2. We had we did a lot of good analysis and a lot of thoughtful planning, and it's paying off. So I just wanted to thank all my colleagues here for good judgment. That's all.
Thank you.
Do you have it listed in here what years the chiefs retire somewhere?
So they did, you can kind of see it. Inside, kind of see it as TID 2 and TID 3 drop off.
So this
It's like a
contemplates
year after closure.
24, 25 for TID 2, and then 2028 for TID 3.
Okay, so at the retirement, then we start to see the tax relief from that. Not only the not paying into it, but I mean also the fact of that the taxes that is generated from that.
Yes. That would start flowing to the city likely in 2028.
In TID 3, we've got a net excess of what currently, or is it a projected net excess? There was that.
In the previous slide, wasn't it just under 3 million?
Yeah, 2.9 million.
Is that actual or is that projected?
That's projected.
Projected.
Well, it's projected based off of the value we expect it to be, so it's not made up. It's projected that it's a pretty sound number.
Right. Yeah, it's based on the development that's already there and the tax rate there.
So if we assume 2.9 million, Alderman Strelchak, that number will go to reduce or pay off these obligations as we march forward. And the proceeds from the bond issue earlier this year will be used to pay for the improvements that the council has authorized. The streetscape, the Ozaki interurban trail crossing, the traffic signal, and some of the other streetscaping enhancements. But that balance in the TID 3 fund should continue to grow. It's gone up almost 2.5 million in 2 years, to the point where 2028 is a projection. It could get paid off sooner, and we could close it out, depending on how things proceed.
I think that also assumes there's no new development. So if there's any new development, just that we need to close it sooner.
It's gravy.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. But I think Director Tollefson would tell you, and I know Director Engroff would tell you, Ellers tends to present their projections in a very conservative fashion, especially when they're doing long-term projections. And typically, what I've seen in my years here with the city is we're exceeding those numbers when it comes to pass. So the projections are very conservative.
I think to the point you made earlier, it'd be interesting to see the typical road program overlaid over the top of this. 'Cause we do have a pretty lengthy track record of doing that every 3 years. I think there's only 1 year we had a hiatus for a year. That's pretty predictable that we're going to do things like that. It'd be interesting to see things like that.
Yeah. And that's where we want to go at this capital financing meeting that we're hoping to have at some point after we get through budget. Yes, Alderman Strelchak.
So as I'm evaluating budget, I want to see, like what the working costs and what everything else is, but we've talked on a high level for several months on Civic Campus. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for some potential budgetary hypotheses as it comes forward for what we may or may not spend on an east side fire building, a new safety building, and the pool, and what it's going to take from a civic campus planning standpoint to address that in a formal, let's agree on what our plan is kind of moving forward so that we can pick apart it later. I'd like to see the plan in the budget for next year for what we're going to do, some ballpark numbers as to what those facilities look like. Otherwise, we're just talking year after year after year, and then we get pinched because we're tight on funds, and then we're like, oh, we'll put it off till next year. And it goes a full year before we even talk about it again.
Understood.
And it tumbles consistently downhill. So while borrowing still isn't unreasonable, it would be helpful from a finance standpoint to see what that meant to look at those buildings earlier than later if we were intending on borrowing or if we were going to pay cash for them. My hunch is that we'd borrow for them. Doing something earlier than later would benefit all the residents from a use standpoint and a tax rate long-term standpoint. Our tax increases have been giving people what they need for the last several years. As we look at parks and the pool, I really want to see some of what they want. Pickleball courts, what's going on with those, where are we at with that? How are we going to start really working as a community to build a community, not just buildings, a community, and address this as we go into the budget meeting. We're out of our normal cycle here. We're in our preliminary phases where we want to talk about what we kind of want to see. And I think for me to evaluate where I'm going to, place my vote and put my emphasis moving forward, those are some of the components that I think would benefit all of us, going forward. So.
Sure.
I think you'd use some of that in the capital plan, right? I remember moving forward when you have our meeting going forward for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
A good point.
Okay.
I think part of that slippage year over year is why we had a strategic plan drafted, so we can keep our eye on the ball more. To your point, we obviously have to fund the studies necessary to even know what those things mean. It's one thing to say we need a new east side fire station. It's another to say exactly what it is and what it might cost because we haven't even studied it yet.
And ironically, a year ago as we were going through budget development, there was no formal discussions underway about merging our fire department with Thiensville. That came shortly after budget adoption, where we executed a memorandum of understanding with Thiensville in December. And so when you look at where that effort went, and it ramped up pretty quick, that became highly intensive through the first part of this year. If you take that away, we're probably a little further along on this effort here in terms of civic campus master planning and maybe even engaging a consultant to help us figure out what information we need and you need to make decisions. Now we're in the boat with Thiensville. Now we've got to get a budget going. We've got to get some staff hired. And oh, by the way, we've got to figure out facilities with Thiensville. So it's not going to be an easy discussion, but I think as we flip the page here on tonight's agenda and roll forward, you're going to see some opportunities for maybe engaging in some of those preliminary discussions into next year.
Police and fire, we know are gonna get handled long-term. Pool, I think, is gonna be the lost child. And I was there this weekend and it's horrible. It's embarrassing. So, you know, as a community that's as affluent as ours, to have a facility like that for our residents to use is embarrassing at the least. So I'd like to see some improvements there for sure. And having that civic campus plan ASAP, so I can vote on it during this term as to where we go with it, would be great. So don't put that, please, as a wish item under budget. It would be great if that's already built in to your budget moving forward.
Well,
You know, the consulting fees to evaluate what that means, that would be.
I'm going to forward the slide.
Yeah.
Taking your lead, Alderman Strelchak.
Yeah.
And we're going to roll through a quick review of the Southern Ozaki Fire Department budget, and then we'll get into the ARPA discussion.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I apologize in advance. The draft Southern Ozaki Fire Department budget was not included in the packet. Carrie and Mia emailed it out to all of you this afternoon. You should have a copy at your place. This will be discussed by the board at their next meeting on Wednesday night. And the two staff teams from Thiensville and Mequon have been working, I would say, at least weekly, if not twice weekly, to develop a budget that the board can approve in September, so that the village board in Thiensville and the common council here in Mequon have that budget to consider as those two governing boards consider their respective municipal budgets by early October. And so the draft budget, and again, this has not been reviewed, discussed, or recommended by the board, but their packet is online, and I thought it was only appropriate to just kind of breeze through an overview tonight of the draft budget as it stands. Includes a number of fee adjustments to ambulance and transport fees that are being recommended by our ambulance billing firm, LifeQuest. As you'll recall, we talked about the fee schedule being updated about 2 years ago. We updated our ambulance fees at that time. Since then, we've fallen behind a number of what other communities are charging, and they have recommended some reasonable adjustments to our ambulance fees that are incorporated into the fee schedule that the board will also be reviewing at their meeting Wednesday night. The fee schedule also includes alarm, sprinkler, and commercial inspection fees, as well as $300,000 in Ozaki County ARPA funds that are now being made available to jurisdictions throughout the county to help supplement and support enhanced EMS staffing. The budget, as it's been prepared, includes a levy increase of CPI plus 2%. I will ballpark that that's probably in the neighborhood of $75,000 to $100,000 on the Mequon side, and closer to $20,000 to $25,000 on the Thiensville side. All that being said, the budget as proposed would result in the addition of 5 more full-time staff, a $200,000 capital contribution to establish that account in year 1, as well as a year 1 reserve balance of 5 or 6%, because this is going to be a standalone entity that's starting from scratch. We've got to give them a little money in the bank so they can pay their bills, they can pay their staff, and they have the the cash reserves and the liquidity to operate as a separate entity. So here you see an overview of the revenues that are contained in the summary that was emailed out to you earlier this afternoon. You can see Mequon's levy for 2022 to cover fire and EMS services is just over 1.3. Going into the budget year, it would be 1.36. Thiensville's levy is actually going to be going up considerably higher. They have to meet the 85-15 sharing threshold that we identified as part of the intergovernmental agreement that was approved back in April and May. Right now, if you look at those two numbers, they're below that, and they have to get up to that level. So they've got a little more catch-up work to do. Their levy's going to be going up more than, on a percentage basis, more than Mequon's. The capital account is the money that we looked at earlier that's historically been provided to our fire department. That would also be increasing via the CPI plus 2%. So you would see some increase here and some increase here. Thiensville's capital would also go up a corresponding amount. The intergovernmental revenue jumps from a combined basis of $209,000 here this year to $538,000. That includes the $300,000 from Ozaukee County. And then, as I mentioned, ambulance revenues would be going from $860 up to $1244. Interestingly, Thiensville's ambulance fees were well below Mequon's. So now they're in the process of bringing their ambulance fees up to our level for the last 3 months of this year, and then next year raising them to a market level that is more on par with what other municipalities like your Brookfields and your North Shore Fire Departments are charging and using to offset the tax impact of funding a fire and EMS operation. Lastly, I talked about new fees, alarms and sprinklers and commercial inspections. You see that regulation and compliance, we currently charge some fees for burn permits, etc., and some inspections. Those are going to be going up marginally through the establishment of these new fees. Interestingly, City Attorney Sadak has been at all of our Southern Ozaukee Fire and EMS board meetings, and he has been advising the board on what we can do legally and what we can't do in terms of revenue generation as a new entity. And his advice to the board has been that if we are going to consider new fees, such as commercial inspections or other types of fees that fire departments in the area charge, we have to do it now, and we'll lose the opportunity to do it in the future. So the draft fee schedule that the board will be reviewing on Wednesday night includes fees that are actually relatively low compared to the market, but we're establishing those fees so that we get them on the books. And then it'll be up to future boards and future councils to decide if it's appropriate to raise those fees as may be necessary. So that's a quick overview of the Southern Ozaukee Fire and EMS Department budget. This is the revenue slide. Here's the expenditure slide. And as I mentioned, right now, the draft budget, and again, the board's going to be reviewing this on Wednesday night, contemplates the addition of 5 full-time firefighter paramedics. There's an increase in fringe benefits and personnel services. Interestingly, commodities are going down, as are equipment maintenance. These are some of the efficiencies that we're realizing through the merger. So, just to give you an example, if you think about memberships, Thiensville has a membership in, let's say, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, as does Mequon. When we combine together, we only need 1 membership. So we are realizing some efficiencies on the commodities and the equipment maintenance side, and we'll likely identify more as we roll through years 2, 3, and 4 of this endeavor. We've got a plug number here for insurance, and as we mentioned, a reserve balance. This $218,000 would be the reserve that would exist on the part of the fire department in year 1. So all in, we've got a budget going from 2.7. If you add in the $300,000 from Ozaki, that takes you to 3. And then we've got additional spending of about $600,000 or so. Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. So the unclassified transfers, that's the seed money injection to get it going? The $219,000?
That would be the resulting fund balance.
Seed money, same thing?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So what happens, I guess, is this a one-time injection and that's, or every year are we gonna give more startup money or?
My hope is it will be a one-time injection. And if we can get to the 10 or 12% through a year-over-year surplus, that would be best for the village. It would be best for the city. And I think it would help the board and the department get us to where we need to go.
Theoretically, expenses could go down, so we're not gonna have that recurring expense next year. So, sure we'll find something else to spend it on,
There's
but.
a plan to continually add more full-time staff too. There's other
Okay.
expenses that'll replace it more than likely.
And the money from Ozaki County, the $300,000 is not gonna come infinitely, it's just a way to help.
Just switch it to something
Yeah.
else. Thank you.
Alderman Bushy.
So it was referenced, I'm not sure if it's too detailed at this point, but with the addition of 5 FTE staff, how does that affect the balance with volunteer services? Is that now more likely to be covered?
Well, I don't have the 5-year projection that was included as part of the intergovernmental agreement as part of these slides. But if you'll recall back in April, as we were continuing to build our full-time staffing complement, our paid on call and some of our part-time expenses would be reduced to help offset that increase in full-time costs. So over time, and I won't speak for the fire chief, but I think he anticipates there being less of a paid on call or part-time staffing complement as we increase the number of full-time positions.
So the net result is you're increasing the coverage liability.
Yes. And we're going to be in a position where we will have what I like to term movable pieces, i.e. full-time staff members, where we can put them in a station at a designated time that we deem appropriate, rather than waiting for volunteers or part-time folks to pick a shift or not pick a shift. And that's the boat we're in right now. We're relying on the good graces of many of our paid on calls availability, and they have full-time jobs and lives and families and other things going on. We're not able to always match up their availability with our scheduling needs.
I think the second half of your question was, where does that put us at with respect to the draft plan? It put us a little bit ahead of that plan, which Will and I have talked, we think is good, because as other municipalities seek to combine and do the same thing, we're all going to be competing for the same people, so we can snatch up people first. Good for us. That'd be someone else's problem. Hopefully, none of our other communities are watching this.
Or hopefully that doesn't get in the minutes.
We're so far ahead, they won't be able to catch us.
All right, so that's a quick overview of the fire and EMS budget that'll be making its way through the board and then to the common council and the village board here in the next number of weeks. Let's move on to the last item on our open session agenda tonight, the American Rescue Plan. As has been communicated previously, we've received $2.5 million in 2 tranches, both in 2021 and 2022. There is no restrictions for the U.S. Treasury Department on the total amounts under $10 million. So our amount, our allocation is $2.5 million. So we're under the 10 million threshold, and we can deem, or we can spend those proceeds on whatever we deem to be appropriate as a city. Any spending more than $750,000 a year triggers a single audit, which is termed for a federal audit, which may increase our auditing expenses. I know it'll create some headaches for the finance department, but We've got 4 years to spend the money, and if we decide to front load spending in any 1 year, that's okay. To date, as was outlined in the memo, we've committed nearly $600,000 to 5 areas. $200,000, as I mentioned, was included in this year's budget. We're recommending lesser amounts in 2023 and 2024 to wean ourselves off the ARPA funds from an operating budget perspective. Funds must be programmed by 2024 and spent by 2026. So we have some time, but we've had funds for, at least half of the funds for well over a year now, and maybe it's time to get moving. So here's the allocation plan that staff has come up with that addresses a number of the key focus areas that the council identified through our strategic planning process. As I mentioned, we've committed some of the funds already. The county line traffic light is estimated to cost $325,000, and while the council has not specifically authorized the use of ARPA funds for that expenditure, it's currently not in our capital plan, and I would only see it being included in our annual capital plan at the expense of other necessary items that we utilize on a year-over-year basis. This is a one-time expense, a one-time improvement. Staff would recommend that it be included in the ARPA spending plan. To Alderman Strelchek's point, we have programmed $25,000 for a space needs assessment that would include all of our city facilities, as well as $75,000 for a civic campus plan. So right there, we've got some budgetary flexibility to not only look at our facilities, but how they may interrelate with the civic campus plan. Under IT and customer service, we've got almost $800,000 programmed for the new land management system, various implementation costs related to that, the development of a centralized database which will underpin or support that land management system, as well as the implementation of 4 Munis modules that we are currently not paying for or utilizing. The police department has requested an upgrade of their phone recording equipment, and the city clerk's office is very anxious to implement electronic poll books. So imagine going to your polling location, as you may have done a couple weeks ago during the August primary, and you see the poll workers leafing through the paper binders. Carolyn Fox has spec'd out equipment that would digitize all of that information and cut down on the lines and make the process more efficient, both from a staffing perspective as well as a customer facing perspective. So we think that would be a good allocation of these one-time resources under our customer service initiatives. Financial stewardship, I mentioned $200,000 for the budget. We'd like to wean ourselves off of that and also include $150,000 in total for the library. As you'll recall, we've already reimbursed the library for $37,000 worth of expenses. That would be included in this number, but approximately $113,000 or $114,000 would be available for them to utilize to address some of their one-time or capital needs over the next several years. We've also included up here Lemke Park Pavilion. The council will recall, I believe it was in maybe late 2020 or early 2021, we approved a contract for architectural services to design the new Lemke Park Pavilion, which would include restrooms and some enhanced amenities. This is the #1 priority of the Park and Open Space Board. This $350,000 would be a down payment on that facility. As you'll recall, park impact fees, we also have a balance approaching $350,000. To date, I'm not sure I nor the council have seen any renderings or plans for that pavilion, but that's something we may want to dive a little more into in the coming months, maybe through a committee of the whole discussion, so that we can begin to line up plans with potentially available funding. Also, in the capital plan is upgrading and automating the brush site. Right now, it's only open limited hours, Wednesdays and Saturdays. We've all been living emerald ash borer over the last number of years, and the intake at our brush site has been heavier than ever. And $250,000 would allow us to make the brush site available to any resident, not on a 24/7 basis, but presumably on a 7-day-a-week basis through the purchase or the issuance of a brush permit. And so $250,000, both from a quality of life and a customer service perspective, would be recommended for the brush site upgrades. And then lastly, we've got $200,000 for various staffing and compensation needs. $21,000 or $22,000 has already been earmarked for the compensation study that's underway. A couple of departments have expressed interest in hiring some graduate school interns for a year or two to help us move forward temporarily on some of the projects identified in our strategic plan. So we're not paying full-time salary, wages, and benefits, but we're getting smart, eager professional, up-and-coming professionals to help us move forward temporarily on some of these projects. And then there are some other enhancements that we're looking to do across some of our buildings in terms of our break rooms, our lunch rooms. You've probably all seen the South Conference Room. That's where all of our employees eat their lunch. We'd like to maybe take a look strategically at some of our perks and our benefits for our employees so that we can continue to remain a good employer of choice here in the region and amongst our competing municipalities. So that's, in a nutshell, the plan. Ideally, we'd like the council to think about this as we roll through the budget development process here this fall and approve a resolution with a finalized spending plan in connection with the adoption of the 2023 budget. Alderman Bushy.
Point of clarification, where you were saying before, previous slide, that trying to do this over several years to keep it under the $750,000 automatic audit. So do you have a plan of this as then annually as to how it would be allocated?
We have not taken that step yet. That would obviously be the next step that we would look to take, pending a general sense of concurrence with the projects listed. There may be other ideas on the part of the council or the committee in terms of what you'd like to see. But we really built this. We started working on this back in the spring, and then as we finalized the strategic plan, it made the most sense to really list these out relative to the categories included within the plan. And we think across the board, while the numbers aren't all equal, at least here, not so much here, but we've got a capital plan and $4.2 million going into capital every year. We think this is a balanced allocation across many of our areas. Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. First of all, I think we've all been wondering how this allocation might look like over the last several months, so I wanted to thank you for a job well done and staff. I like how you categorized it by the strategic plan, which I believe is the lens through which we should view all spending moving forward. I'm a big supporter of the library. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of that budgeting process, because like we talked about, it is a quasi entity, just like SOFD is, or SOFD. So I see that we're allocating $150,000 for the library, which certainly I'm sure they have plenty of uses for it. I guess it would be helpful to see what they would propose doing with that as part of their allocation, rather than just have here's $150,000. So that's part one. The other part is, again, we're a quasi entity with the village of Thiensville, so that leaves me wondering, well, do they get any ARPA allocation, and what are their intentions? So I think for this to be an equitable relationship, as we're contributing this money, I think it's fair to ask our partners, are you going to be able to step forward with ARPA funds as well, so that we're not funding all of these capital items, such as the parking lot? Thank you.
Okay, duly noted. So this is more food for thought. Obviously, if there are any comments or questions or suggestions, you know, we certainly have time tonight. But again, this is a first cut, and this is something we'd like the council to continue to talk about during this budget development process. And ultimately, if we have concurrence on one or more projects, we'd look to program those for the 2023 budget as appropriate, and maybe have a spending plan adopted in connection with adoption of the 2023 budget.
So if we wanted to, not saying we're doing that, but if we wanted to, instead of leaving 60 grand for the 24 budget, if we were inclined to, we could put that in the 23 budget. Use that funds for the 23 budget if we wanted to help set off some of the inflationary factor in the 23 budget, and all indications that inflation should be subsiding sometimes before 2024. So being able to use some of that previous to it, where it would have a bigger impact, I think, in the 2023 budget, because everything's going to be increasing so much. And not saying it wouldn't increase in 2024, because it almost does a little bit, but wouldn't be as a dramatic increase if we did something of that nature.
Okay, so you'd like the budget team to look at that allocation for use potentially in 2023?
And it's not changing the purpose of it, it's just changing the year.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next steps in terms of the budget process, this was also in the memo. Obviously, we have our workshop meeting here tonight. We're proposing to distribute the budget on September 26th. Looks like our appropriations meeting, as I mentioned, will either be on October 3rd or October 6th. That's a Monday or a Thursday. We're still waiting on a couple of pieces of information there. We have our Common Council meeting October 11th, and if necessary, we could schedule a second Appropriations Committee meeting towards mid-October. That has not been necessary over the last couple of years. We've been able to wrap it up in one night, but we want to make sure we allow for that nonetheless. And then we'll have sewer and water budgets coming forward as well, and that will likely take another separate evening, because I know Directors Lundin and Tollefson want to have a policy discussion with the council regarding the interrelationship between land use and our utilities, because there is a nexus there between the decisions we make on the land use side and how it affects our utilities. We think that's a good discussion to bring forward to the council and have that in a workshop style session as we consider the budgets. So, with that, any questions or comments relative to the information presented?
Going once, going twice.
I'm good with it. Yeah.
Okay,
I gotta read this thing, don't
you do.
I? All right, so we're on agenda item 8. So it's a potential closed session item. Let's see, where do I start? It's collective bargaining for Mequon Police Association and Mequon Fire and EMS Association related to various benefits provided by the city. The committee of the whole may convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85 prin 1 prin E, deliberating or negotiating the public purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, and then may reconvene into open session to take such action as deemed appropriate. Is there a motion to go into closed session? Move to go into closed session.
Second.
Motion and a second. This requires a roll call vote, doesn't it? Or is that only at council? We'll roll call it anyway.
Aye.
Alderman Schultz?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Alderman Hancher.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Parrish. Alderwoman Schneider.
Aye.
Nice.
Wish you were just the one with all our land.
We'll go into closed session.
What? But when she was doing your show.
I'm good, yeah.